There are choices you make in less than a second that decide the rest of your life. You don't know it at the time. You just move. You reach out a hand because a child is about to fall, because the river is loud and cold and hungry, because no part of you can stand to watch and do nothing. And in that one breath, while your heart is still trying to catch up to your body, the whole shape of your future quietly bends in a new direction, and you have no idea. I didn't know, that gray afternoon by the water, that I had just pulled a king's whole world back from the edge with my bare hands. I only knew the girl was shaking. I only knew I was soaked to the ribs and couldn't feel my fingers. I thought it was over. It was just beginning. The river was the color of old, iron the day it tried to take her. I remember that detail more than I remember being cold, more than I remember my own name catching in my throat. The Maddox River runs hard through the bottom of Cedar Hollow in early spring, fat with snowmelt off the ridges, and everyone in town knows you stay back from the cut bank where the water has chewed the earth into a black overhang. Everyone knows. I'd grown up being told. I'd told it to 100 summer kids myself, when I worked the ranger booth before the booth shut down, and the town quietly forgot it ever had one. So when I came around the bend on the trail that afternoon, my dog Biscuit pulling at the leash and my mind half on the leaking faucet I still hadn't fixed, the last thing my brain wanted to believe was the small red coat at the edge of that bank. A little girl, 5, maybe 6, crouched right at the lip of the overhang, reaching down toward something in the water with the total, fearless concentration only small children have. A stuffed rabbit, I'd learn later. The dumbest, most heartbreaking reason in the world to lean out over a river that could swallow a grown man. Hey, my voice came out wrong too tight. Hey, sweetheart, don't. The earth gave. I've replayed the next 4 seconds more times than I can count, and they never get faster. The bank just folded, a slab of wet black soil tipping into the current with a sound like a wet sheet snapping, and she went with it, not screaming. That's the part that still wakes me up some nights. She didn't even scream. She just dropped, surprised, her little mouth a perfect O, and the river closed over the red coat like it had been waiting. I don't remember dropping the leash. I don't remember the cold. I told you choices like this happen in less than a second, and they do, but inside that second time stretches out long and slow and terrible. I remember thinking very clearly, the water is moving left to right, get downstream of her, and then I was in it. And the cold hit me like a fist closing around my whole chest, and the world narrowed to one thing, a flash of red. People say the body floats. The body does not float when it's a panicking 6-year-old in a snow coat that drinks water like a sponge. I went under once, came up choking, and saw her, 3 feet ahead, going down, and I did the one thing my brain had time for. I threw my arm out and grabbed. I got fabric. Then I got her arm. Then I got her, both arms locked around a thrashing, terrified child, and the current swung us both hard into the root tangle of an old cottonwood that had half fallen into the river years back. And that dead tree, that ugly, rotting, in the way dead tree the county had been meaning to remove for a decade. That tree is the reason we are both alive. I hooked my leg over a root. She screamed now, finally, a high thin sound right against my ear, and it was the best sound I had ever heard because it meant her lungs were working. I got us to the shallows on my back, kicking, one hand always, always around her, until my heels dug into gravel and I dragged us up onto the stones and we collapsed there, the two of us, heaving and shaking and alive. She clung to me like I was the last solid thing in the world. I held her. I didn't even know her name. Up on the trail, Biscuit was barking himself hoarse. The river kept moving, indifferent, like it hadn't just nearly committed murder. "You're okay," I kept saying, though my teeth were chattering so hard the words came out broken. "You're okay, I've got you, you're okay." Her name was Junie. She told me eventually in the small, wrecked voice of a child who has cried herself empty. Junie, and she was this many, 4 fingers held up, then a 5th added with great seriousness, and her rabbit was gone in the river, and that of all things was what finally undid her into real sobbing. Not the near drowning. The rabbit. I carried her up the bank wrapped in my own coat, which was useless and soaked, but it was something. And I half ran the mile back to the trailhead with her face pressed into my neck and my arms screaming and a single thought beating in my skull. Get her warm, get her warm, get her warm. That's where the night should have ended. A near miss. A scared kid returned to scared parents, a hot bath, a story I'd tell for years. Did I ever tell you about the time I pulled a little girl out of the Maddox? That's the version of that day I expected to keep. But here is the thing, nobody tells you about Cedar Hollow. There are two towns layered over the same streets. There's the one I lived in, the gas station, the diner with the cracked vinyl booths, the church potlucks, the people who'd known my mother. And there's another one underneath it, older, quieter, that most folks never see at all. A town inside the town. A people who'd been in these mountains longer than the roads, who didn't show up on any census, who came down to trade and then went back up into the high timber where the maps just say National Forest and leave it at that. I knew about them the way everyone in Cedar Hollow knows, which is to say, not really. You heard things. You saw a stranger at the feed store with eyes that held the light a half second too long, with a stillness to them, a way of standing like the ground belonged to them. You learned not to wander too far up the North Ridge after dark. You learned it without anyone ever sitting you down and explaining why. The Hollow keeps its mouth shut about a lot of things. That's how it survives. Junie was one of them. I didn't know it then. I only knew that when I came stumbling into the trailhead lot with her in my arms. A truck I didn't recognize came tearing in off the forest road, gravel spitting, and a woman threw herself out of it before it had fully stopped. And the way she moved, the speed of it, the absolute wrongness of how fast a person could cross 30 feet of parking lot, that was the first crack in everything I thought I understood. She took Junie from me with a sound I have never heard a human being make. It came from somewhere below grief. She held her daughter and rocked and made that sound, and then she lifted her face to me, and her eyes, God, her eyes were gold, lit from inside like a lamp behind amber glass, and they were not the eyes of anything I'd ever called a neighbor. And she said, in a voice gone ragged, You pulled her out." It wasn't a question. I nodded anyway. I was shaking too hard to do much else. "You went into the Maddox in spring melt, for a child you don't know." She said it slowly, like she was turning the fact over looking for the catch. Human. The word landed strange, like an accusation, like a category I was being sorted into. "She's 5, I said, which didn't answer anything. Anybody would've. "No," her voice cut clean across mine, flat and certain. "No, not anybody, not for one of ours." I didn't understand. I wouldn't understand for days. I just stood there dripping in a freezing parking lot while a woman with golden eyes held her saved daughter and looked at me like I'd done something far larger than I knew, and underneath her gratitude, way down, there was something else moving. Something that looked almost like fear. Of me. She wrapped Junie in a blanket from the truck. She asked my name. I told her Marin. Marin Ash. She repeated it once quietly, the way you'd note something down to remember it. Then she said thank you, and it cost her something to say, I could see that, and she got back in the truck and drove up the forest road and was gone into the trees before I'd even stopped shivering. That should have been the strange part of the story. A grateful mother, a little odd, a little intense, vanishing up a logging road. People are strange when their children almost die. I told myself that the whole drive home, the heater roaring, biscuit pressed wet and anxious against my side. I told myself I'd imagined the eyes. The cold does things to your head. Shock does things. I did not imagine the eyes. I know that now. But that night I went home to my little rented house at the dead end of Sycamore, peeled off my ruined clothes, stood under the hottest shower I could stand until the shaking finally stopped, and made myself a cup of tea I didn't drink and a fire I sat in front of for 2 hours without seeing it. My hands wouldn't quite settle. Every time I closed my eyes I saw the red coat going under. I saw Junie's surprised little mouth. You don't walk away from holding a child's life in your two arms and just go back to worrying about a leaky faucet. Something in me had been rearranged. I felt cracked open, tender, in the way a bruise is tender, that new feeling where the body keeps reminding you it happened. I didn't sleep much. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up and sat at the kitchen window with Biscuit's head heavy on my foot and watched the tree line at the back of the yard, the dark wall of timber that climbs the ridge, and I had the distinct, prickling, ridiculous feeling that the timber was watching me back. 3 days passed. I want to be honest about those 3 days because they matter. I went back to my ordinary life and I clung to it. I worked my shift at the hardware store. I fixed the faucet, finally. I told exactly one person what had happened, Dottie, who runs the register at the diner and has known me since I was small. And the way her face changed when I described the truck coming off the forest road, the way she went still and said, "What did the mother look like, Marin?" And then said, "Honey, you stay away from the North Ridge," and wouldn't say one word more no matter how I pushed. That should have told me everything. Cedar Hollow keeps its mouth shut. I told you that. By the 3rd evening, I'd half convinced myself it was over. The mother had thanked me. The girl was safe. Whatever was strange about them was their business and lived up a road I had no reason to drive. I made dinner. I put on an old movie. The rain had come in off the ridge that afternoon, the slow, heavy kind that settles in for the night, and the gutters were running, and the house was warm, and Biscuit was snoring. And for the first time in 3 days, I felt something like normal beginning to knit itself back together. Then Biscuit's head came up off the floor. He didn't bark. That's what I noticed first. The wrongness of it. Biscuit barks at delivery trucks, at the wind, at his own reflection. He didn't bark now. He stood, slow, and faced the front door, and a low sound started in his chest that I had never heard from him in 6 years. A sound like something much older than a 40-pound mutt should be able to make, and the hair stood up all along his spine in a ridge. And then into the quiet came the knock. 3 slow strikes against the wood. Not loud. They didn't need to be loud. Each one was deliberate, spaced, heavy, the knock of someone who has never in his life had to knock twice. The kind of knock that doesn't ask whether you're home. It tells you it knows. I sat frozen on the couch with my fork halfway to my mouth. Through the front window, past the runnels of rain, I could see a shape on my porch. Tall. Still. Not shifting its weight the way people do, not hunching against the rain. Just standing, perfectly composed, water running off him, as if the weather were a thing happening to other people. Biscuit's growl climbed higher. I put a hand on his collar and felt him trembling, not with fear exactly, with recognition. Like every instinct in his small, loyal body had just identified something it had no words for and did not know whether to fight or lie down. The knock came again, 3 slow strikes. I should have stayed on the couch. I want you to understand that some animal part of me knew, the same way Biscuit knew, that the thing on the other side of that door was going to change everything, that I could still choose to sit very still in my warm little house and let it pass, that there was a before and I was still standing in it. But I had pulled a child out of a river 3 days ago. I had learned something about myself in the cold, dark water, that when the moment comes, I move. I don't sit still. I never have. It's the best and the most dangerous thing about me. I got up. I crossed the room with my heart going like a hammer and Biscuit pressed against my leg the whole way, and I put my hand on the deadbolt, and through the door I said, in a voice I tried to keep steady and mostly failed, "Who is it?" A pause. The rain hissed. When he answered, his voice came low and even through the wood, and it did something to the air in the room, dropped the temperature, made the hair on my own arms rise to match my dog's. It was a voice that had never once been raised because it had never once needed to be. "My name is Thuron," he said. "You saved my daughter's life. I've come to repay a debt I cannot leave unpaid." His daughter. The golden-eyed woman flashed behind my eyes, not for one of hours. and 100 half-heard rumors in Dottie's white face, and the stranger at the feed store with eyes that held the light too long. All of it came together at once into a single cold understanding that I had no name for yet but felt in my bones. I slid the deadbolt. I told you I almost didn't open it. This is the part where I did, and I have spent a long time since wondering what would have become of me, of all of us, if I'd left it shut. But you don't get to know that. You only get the door you opened. You only get the life that follows from the second you decided to move. I turned the handle, I pulled the door in. And the rain framed him there on my porch, tall and dark and utterly still, water sheeting off the shoulders of a long coat, his face all hard plains and shadow, and then he lifted his head, and his eyes found mine. I told myself I imagined the mother's eyes. Standing in my own doorway with the rain roaring off the gutters, I lost that lie for good. His were darker than hers, old gold, the color of a coin that's been carried in a pocket for 50 years, and they did not blink the way eyes are supposed to. They held me. I felt held, pinned, the way a rabbit must feel in the half-second before it decides whether the shape in the grass is a stone or a wolf. Biscuit had stopped growling. That frightened me more than the growl had. He'd gone flat to the floor at my feet, ears down, tail tucked, and he was making a small high sound in his throat, submission, total and instant, the surrender of an animal that has correctly read the rank of the thing in front of it. "May I come in?" Thuron said, "out of the weather." It wasn't really a question, and we both knew it, and the strange thing, the thing I keep coming back to, is that he asked anyway. He stood there getting drenched and waited on my word. A man built like he could take the door off its hinges with one arm, waiting in the rain for a soaked little nobody from Sycamore Street to grant him permission to step over her threshold. I'd learned later that this mattered enormously, that a threshold given freely and a threshold taken are two entirely different things among his people, and that he would have stood on my porch until the rain turned to snow before he crossed it uninvited. But that night I only knew that the asking undid something in me. Monsters don't ask. Whatever he was, he asked. "Come in," I said. He had to duck the doorframe. Inside, in the small lamp-lit warmth of my living room, he looked too large for the world I'd built, the second-hand couch, the chipped mug on the side table, the paused movie throwing blue light across the wall. He stood very still in the center of it, and water ran off his coat onto my floor, and he looked, for one disarming second, almost uncertain. Like a man who has walked a long way toward a thing he doesn't know how to do. "You're Junie's father," I said. "I am Thuron Vale." A pause, as if the next words had weight he was deciding whether to set down. "I lead my people. There aren't many left who carry that word the way I do, but it's mine. The ones who live above this town, on the high ground, they're mine to keep. The ones nobody talks about." Something moved across his face. Not a smile, the memory of where a smile would go. Cedar Hollow has been very good at not talking about us for a long time. It's an old arrangement. We stay to the ridge. The town stays out of the timber. Everyone keeps breathing. His gaze dropped to Biscuit, flat on the floor and gentled by a fraction. "Your dog understands what I am better than you do." "Then tell me." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Because I've spent 3 days thinking I imagined a woman's eyes and a truck that moved too fast, and I'm tired of pretending. What are you?" He looked at me for a long moment. The rain filled the silence. "You went into the Maddox River in spring melt," he said instead of answering, "for a child you had never seen. You wrapped her in your own coat. You ran a mile carrying her. You didn't stop to ask who she was or what it would cost you, or whether anyone would ever know you'd done it." He said it the way a man reads back a tally. "Sierra told me, my Junie's mother. She told me everything 3 times over, and each time her hands shook." He paused. "We do not see that often, not from your kind toward ours." My kind. There it was again, that word that sorted me. "You keep saying it like there's a wall." "There is a wall." He said it flatly, without apology. It was built over a long time, and it was built for good reasons, and most of those reasons are written in blood that you've never read about because the people who could have told the story made very sure it was never written down. He moved, finally, crossed to the window, looked out at the dark wall of timber climbing the ridge, the same tree line I'd sat watching at 3 in the morning. Your kind has hunted mine for as long as both of us have had legs to run on. Not here, not lately, but the memory is in the blood. We teach our children to fear the lowland the way you teach yours to fear the river. A beat. And then a lowland woman goes into the river for one of our children and nearly drowns doing it. Do you understand how that lands? Do you understand what you broke? I didn't, not yet. I was still catching up to the simple, impossible fact of him, to the way the lamplight caught the planes of his face, to the contained stillness of him that wasn't calm so much as a storm holding its breath. But I was starting to feel the shape of it, that I hadn't just saved a child. I'd done something that the people on the ridge didn't have a category for. I'd handed them a problem. What I am, he said quietly, turning back to me, is the thing your oldest stories are about told slant. We are wolves, not the four-legged kind, though we wear that shape too, older than that. We were here when these mountains were young and will be here when the roads are gone. We live long, we heal fast, and we cannot leave a true debt unpaid. It isn't manners, it's deeper than manners, it's in the marrow. A life given is a life owed, and the owing doesn't rest until it's answered. I should have been terrified. Part of me was, but a larger part of me, the part that had stood in a freezing parking lot and watched a grieving mother and felt the truth of her even before I understood it, simply believed him. There are some truths the body recognizes before the mind agrees. I'd been feeling the edges of this one for 3 days. So you've come to pay me back, I said slowly, for Junie. Yes. With what? I almost laughed and it came out shaky. Money? I'm not, look, I don't want anything, I'd do it again. Anybody decent would, you don't owe me. Stop. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The word came out with the weight of the mountain behind it, and I stopped, and I understood for one cold second exactly why my dog was pressed flat to the floor. Do not tell me what I owe, you don't have the words for it yet. You think a debt like this is a thing I can hand you across a doorway and walk away clean. It isn't. He drew a breath. When you put your arms around my daughter and pulled her out of that water, you didn't save a child. Among my people, Junie isn't a child. She's the last of the old line, the one who was supposed to carry everything forward after me. If she died in the Maddocks, it wouldn't have been a tragedy. It would have been the end of us. 300 years gone in a coat the color of a stop sign. The room tilted a little. The last of the old line. I thought of that small wet weight in my arms, the 4 fingers held up, the rabbit she'd cried over. I thought, she had no idea. She was just a kid chasing a stuffed animal. She doesn't know, I said. She's 5. His voice cracked just slightly on the word, the first fully human thing I'd heard from him, the sound of a father and not a king. No, she doesn't know, and I'd give a great deal for her to stay not knowing as long as she can. He looked at me, and there was something raw underneath the stone now, something he was letting me see on purpose, I think, because he decided I'd earned it. Which is the other reason I'm here, and the harder one. Harder than telling me wolves are real. Yes, he didn't soften it. Marin Ash, the lowland woman who pulled the air of the ridge out of the river, that story is already moving. My people are talking, and not all of them are grateful. His jaw tightened. There are some who think a human knowing this much is a danger that doesn't pay for itself, no matter what she did. There are some who'd rather the river had finished what it started than have a stranger walking around Cedar Hollow holding the truth in her hands. The wall I told you about. There are those who'd kill to keep it standing, and they don't much care which side the body falls on. The warmth went out of the room. Outside the rain kept on, indifferent, the way the river had been indifferent. You're telling me I'm in danger, I said, because I saved her. I'm telling you the world you stepped into doesn't keep neat accounts. He came toward me then, not threatening, slow, the way you'd approach something you didn't want to startle. Up close he smelled of rain and cold pine, and something underneath that, warm and animal and strange. I'm telling you that the same act that owes you my whole gratitude also makes you a problem some of mine would solve with their teeth. And I will not let the woman who saved my daughter pay for it with her life. That's the debt. That's what I came to repay. Not money, protection. Mine, for as long as you need it and longer. He stopped an arm's length away. But you have to understand what you're accepting. Because once I stand between you and them, there's no quiet version of your life anymore. There's no going back to the hardware store and the leaky faucet and never thinking about the ridge. You'll have crossed over, and the wall doesn't let people back. I stood there in my own small living room with a king of wolves an arm's length away, the rain running off the eaves, my dog flat on the floor, my heart going like a struck bell. And I thought about the second by the river, the bank folding, the red coat going under, the part of me that doesn't sit still ever, the part that moves. I'd already crossed over, I realized. I'd crossed the second I went into the water. He was just the first one to tell me the truth about it. And if I say no, I asked, if I tell you to leave, lock the door, take my chances. For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the room where one would live. Then I'd leave, he said, because I asked permission to cross your threshold, and I'd honor a no the same way. But I'd post my people in your tree line tonight whether you said the word or not, because some debts a man pays even when he's been told not to. The almost smile faded. I'd rather you said yes. I'd rather you let me do this where you can see it instead of behind your back. You went into the river in the open, where anyone could have seen you fail. Let me stand for you the same way. I opened my mouth. And that was the moment Biscuit's head snapped up off the floor a second time, toward the back of the house now, toward the dark yard and the tree line, and a low sound started in his chest, and Thuron went absolutely still, his head turning, his nostrils flaring, every line of him gone from man to something else in the space of a breath. He moved to the center of the room and the air seemed to thicken around him. I'd thought him still before. Now I understood that what I'd been watching all night was a man holding himself down, the way you'd hold a lid on something boiling, and that the stillness had been the effort, not the nature. He let a little of it go now, just a little, and it was like standing next to a power line you suddenly realize is live. The back of my house has a door with a glass pane in the top half, and through it the yard was a black smear of rain. Then it wasn't. Then there were shapes at the tree line, 3 of them, low, 4-legged, eyes catching the light from my kitchen window and throwing it back in flat green discs. They didn't come closer. They sat at the edge of the dark and they watched, and the watching was worse than charging would have been. Thuron, my voice was a thread. I see them. He didn't turn. Don't run. Whatever happens, don't run. To them, running is the same as agreeing to be chased. A pause. Sierra's brother, Call, the big one on the left. I'd hoped it wouldn't be him. You know them. I've known him his whole life. I held him the day he was born. The flatness in his voice was the saddest thing I'd heard all night. That's how these things always go in the end. It's never strangers at the door. It's the ones you held. The back door didn't burst open. That's not how it happened. And I want to tell it the way it happened because the truth was stranger and quieter than the story I'd have made up. The shapes at the tree line stood and shimmered. There's no better word. The air around them bent like heat off summer asphalt. And then there were 3 men crossing my wet grass in the rain, barefoot, unbothered by the cold, and the big one in front had Sierra's golden eyes set in a harder face, and when he stopped at my back door he didn't knock. He just looked through the glass at Thuron, and then at me, and his lip pulled back. Thuron opened the door before Call could touch it, stepped half through it into the rain, putting his own body in the gap, and I heard him speak in a low, even voice in a language I didn't know, old, rolling, full of sounds my mouth couldn't have made, and Call answered in the same tongue. And it went back and forth, hard and fast, and I caught nothing of the words but everything of the meaning, because grief and fury and pleading sound the same in every language ever spoken. Then Call said in English clearly for my benefit, so I would understand exactly what I was. She carries it now, Thuron, the whole of it. She walks down to that diner and she sits in that booth and she knows what we are. One frightened word to the wrong person, and 300 years ends in helicopters and men with rifles. You'd risk all of us for one human's gratitude. She didn't ask to carry it. Thuron's voice never rose. She earned it. There's a difference, and if you can't feel the difference anymore, call, then you've forgotten what we're even protecting. I'm protecting Junie. And there it was, the thing under the fury. Call's voice broke on his niece's name the same way Thuron's had, and I understood with a lurch that I was not watching a villain. I was watching an uncle who'd nearly lost the child too, who'd been eaten alive by the same terror Sira had, and who'd come down the mountain in the rain not out of cruelty, but out of a love so frightened it had curdled into the conviction that the only safe human was a silent one. She's the last of us. And you've tied her fate to a stranger you've known for the length of one conversation. If she talks, I won't talk. I don't know where I found the voice. I was supposed to stay behind Thuron, and I'd meant to. But I heard myself say it, and then I stepped up into the open doorway beside him, into the cold spray of rain off the eaves, into the green-gold stare of three creatures out of the world's oldest fears. And I said it again, louder, because my whole life I have never once been able to sit still in the moment that matters. I won't talk, not to Dottie, not to anyone, not ever. I was shaking, but I held his eyes. You want to know why? Not because I'm scared of you, I am, but that's not why. I swallowed. I had a sister, younger than me. When I was 19, she went through the ice on Carter's Pond, and I was on the bank, and I froze. I didn't move. For the longest 3 seconds of my life, I just stood there, and by the time I went in, it was too late, and I have carried that for 11 years. My voice was coming apart now, and I let it. So when I came around that bend and saw Junie at the edge of that water, I didn't think about who she was or what it had cost. I couldn't have stopped myself if I tried. I have spent 11 years not freezing. Do you understand? I didn't save your air to hold it over you. I saved her because I could not stand on a riverbank one more time and do nothing. I was crying and not bothering to hide it. You think I'd take a thing like that and turn it into a story for the diner? You think I'd cash in the one good second of my whole life? I'd cut my own tongue out first. The rain filled the silence. Call stared at me, and something moved behind the gold of his eyes, some recalibration, the slow turn of a man being forced to put a person where a problem had been. It was Sira who broke it. I hadn't seen her come. She was simply there at the edge of the porch light, soaked through, Junie nowhere in sight, left safe somewhere up the ridge. I understood, and she'd heard all of it, every word, and her face was wet with more than rain. She crossed the grass and she stopped beside her brother, and she put her hand flat on his chest, and she said something low in the old tongue, just to him, and whatever it was, the fight went out of him by inches. His shoulders came down. He looked suddenly very tired. Carter's Pond, Sira said to me in English. Your sister, what was her name? The question caught me off guard. Nell, I said. Her name was Nell. Sira nodded slowly, like she was filing it somewhere it would be kept. Then Nell saved my daughter, she said. 11 years late, and through you. That's how it works, you know. Nothing's ever really wasted. The water takes one and gives one back if you wait long enough by the bank. Her golden eyes shone. Junie's been asking for you, the lowland lady who smelled like the cold river and held her so tight. She wants to know if you'll come up and meet her rabbit. We got her a new one. A wet laugh. She named it after you. There's now a stuffed rabbit named Marin living on the ridge, and you'll never hear the end of it. I made a sound that was half sob and half laugh. Thuron's hand found the small of my back, the first time he'd touched me, steady and warm and asking nothing. Call looked at me one last time. Then he looked at Thuron and he said in English rough, if she talks, it's on you. It always was, Thuron said. And Call shimmered and bent the air and was a wolf again, and turned and loped off into the timber, and the other two followed, and Sira lingered just long enough to reach out and squeeze my hand, her grip too strong, careful and not careful enough, the grip of someone unused to gentleness with the fragile. And then she was gone too, up into the dark and the rain, and the yard was empty, and it was just the two of us in my doorway and a dog who'd finally lifted his head off the floor. We stood there a while. The rain eased to a drizzle and then to that fine mist that isn't quite anything. I was still crying a little. I didn't try to stop. 11 years, Thuron said at last quietly. You carried that alone for 11 years. You know something about carrying things. The corner of his mouth moved, the room where the smile lived again, and this time something almost lived in it. I would. I thought about everything he'd said. No going back. No quiet version of your life. You'll have crossed over and the wall doesn't let people back. I thought about the hardware store and the cracked vinyl booths and the leaky faucet I'd finally fixed. My whole small, safe, ordinary life, the before. I looked up the ridge into the dark where a 5-year-old who shouldn't be alive was asleep beside a stuffed rabbit with my name. She really named the rabbit Marin, I asked. She did. He turned to look at me, rain in his hair, gold eyes catching the porch light and holding it a half-second too long, the way they had at the very first. Will you come, in the morning, to meet it? I should tell you I hesitated. I should tell you I weighed the wall and the danger and the no going back, that I was wise about it, that I thought it through. But you've been with me from the river, and you know me by now. You know what I do in the second that matters. Yeah, I said, I'll come. He nodded slow, like a man setting down something he'd been carrying a long way. Then he stepped back off my porch into the thinning rain, and he didn't shimmer, didn't change, he just walked, on 2 feet, into the dark toward the tree line, a king going home. At the edge of the yard he paused. He didn't turn around. Marin Ash, he said to the night, to the timber, to me, thank you for not sitting still. And then the dark took him too. I stood in the doorway a long time after he was gone, biscuit pressed warm against my leg, the mist settling silver on the grass, the ridge a black wall against a blacker sky. Somewhere up there a child was sleeping. Somewhere up there was the rest of my life, whatever shape it was going to take, and I had no idea what it would cost me or whether the wall would hold, or what it meant that my heart had not stopped pounding since a man with gold eyes knocked 3 slow times on my door. I only knew I wasn't going to find out by standing still. I went up the next morning. The sun came out for it. The forest road was longer than I expected, and the timber closed over me green and dripping, and a little girl in a clean, dry coat came running down the path to meet me with a rabbit held high over her head, shouting a name across the trees.